Okay, hello and welcome to the Summer Schoolin' YouTube channel. If you're hearing this on the podcast, welcome to the Summer Schoolin' podcast. I'm your host Nico, and if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel. If you watch through this and you don't like it, still give me a like and give me in the comments the criticisms you have with it, so we can keep the conversation going. But for today, right now, I am interviewing an individual who I have a lot of great respect for, because if it weren't for this man, I probably wouldn't have gotten through my second year of teaching. I mean, I probably would have, but there would have been a lot more meltdowns in my head from listening to his work uh, and going through my professional developments and teaching school and moving into building this channel. I always hear the voice or his voice in my head saying, let's talk about solutions. So, my guest today is pragmatic, sensible, most importantly, motivating. As at least for me, motivating in the way of always stay curious, always ask questions, and working in an industry like education that's desire to ask questions constantly gets stifled or at least dampened by maintaining the status quo. It's like running alongside someone in a marathon and they give you a pep talk when you need it. His work, I've learned about him through his Cut the Bull podcast, where he does fine work with Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And from that podcast, I have been introduced to so many books: Agent Under Fire, An Inconvenient Minority, Black Victim to Black Victor. But today we are going to talk about his book, Race Crazy, right here. I don't keep the dust covers, but it's still good. And we're going to talk about this book because from listening to the podcast, I was actually surprised because you'll always slide it in with a modest plug. And after reading the book, I'm like, this guy needs an opportunity to flex on the great and thoughtful work he has delivered. So without further ado, my guest today, Charles Love.
What? Talk about being speechless. You can't do a setup like that and expect me to follow. I mean, I hope it's not all downhill from there, but I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it's great to be on, and I'm glad you reached out. But I learned some things just in that intro I didn't know. Forget about the stuff about me, but that you were listening in your second year of teaching. Hopefully we can get into that, all that,
Absolutely.
still talk about the
Absolutely.
book. But that is really, I'm glad you listened to the podcast. And the podcast is interesting because when you bring guests on, it's really about them and the topic. So you can't just sit there, well, let me, I threw some about that. Even when I do,
Yeah.
she rolls her eyes like, here he goes again. But, it's like, you can't just be like, let me tell you what I think and how I would fix that. Because, you
Yeah.
want to hear what they say. But it's funny that you mentioned that. And I truly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. No, it's all good. And we can talk about my stuff and my experience going through the world of education. But you were always saying on the podcast, and it's very clear through this book, that education is almost the antidote to all this social, I don't know, so just social chaos. In terms of it's cultural chaos, there we go, in terms of everyone yelling at each other. Education is the way through. So I know I gave my introduction of who you are to me, but for the listeners that don't know, how would you give like a short interview of your or introduction of your background, growing up, and what led you into writing specifically?
Well, I guess those two different things. Let's talk about the background and what led me into writing first. It was never my intent. I guess the difference is a lot of people get into this, they call these people unfairly, I believe, grifters, and saying they're just trying to make money. And I've talked about that before. Like, I don't think many of these people are. If they're going to make money doing it, that's fine, but that's not why they did it. But, like anyone else, I guess, something triggered you to do it. For many, but what made me a little different is for a lot of people that you see on the front lines who are vocal, kudos to them, but they came to this through something that happened to them, right? Because we're all beings who are, whatever our views, mostly concerned about our own well-being. So we might see this stuff and it's like, I don't agree with it, and never talk about it.
Yeah.
But the moment the mob comes after them, they're like, I have to do something about it, because now that I've been canceled, I have to fight my way back, and I should help others, which is a noble thing. But the reason mine is different is because nobody really came from me. I just noticed it. I just noticed that, this stuff doesn't seem right. It's not logical. And the end result, if we continue to push this way, is going to be, like you say, chaos. So I started writing just because of that. Just like, does this really make sense? And I have still, even as though it's gotten louder, I have this belief that most people don't think that stuff is logical. They just happen to have the mega horn right now.
Yeah.
So I guess I first started doing this when Obama won. And it wasn't a knock to Obama. It was more like, I'm the kind of person that steps back and just looks at reactions of things. And what I thought was odd was that all my friends, who have been professionals and living their lives for years, most of them Black, not having issues, not talking about race relations like every day, the man is on me.
Yeah.
And Obama won, and they just became these political theorists overnight, right? They were saying that all this stuff. And none of it was true, by the way. So I just started writing little notes to myself, like, my friend just said this. Does that make sense? Or you look in the history books and it's actually the opposite of the truth. Where are they getting this from? So I started recording these conversations that I had with people. And so I wrote my first book just about being logical. And it was about how I'm not really trying to get into anyone's political views and tell them what they should and shouldn't do. But I was kind of speaking to those people who live this traditional life. They were in a strong relationship. They were married. They were professionals. They were doing well. They were, all indications that they were doing well, but they were talking about this oppression thing, and they were talking about this political angst. And I'm like, for those of you who truly believe that, and the way you're living says this, why are you speaking in ways that are, opposite of this? So I started to talk about that. And then that kind of led me to seeing this movement of what I call, like, my second book, We Want Equality, how the fight for equality gave way to preference. So I saw this movement of kind of like, hey, we want this. People used to say we fought for equality, and now today they're talking equity. But this is, four years ago, right? 4 or 5 years. Right.
I was getting all of that, and yeah.
Right. So 4 or 5 years ago, I was saying, but that doesn't, based on what they're saying and what they're pushing for, they don't want equality. They want preference. Yeah. Right. So, and I used to say, if we're going to exchange a clear vision and have an exchange of ideas, somebody needs to convince them to be honest about what they really want. Don't cloak it in equality and then push what is openly inequality, or openly racist, or openly choosing certain members of society over others. And so now they're doing that, of course. And so I just started writing about that because I just thought it was antithetical to moving forward. So I thought somebody needed to say something about it.
Were you always of this open to asking questions about, I don't know, I would say Black politics, but like, for example, you were bringing up Obama, and I remember I was in a sophomore in high school when that happened. Mm-hmm. And my dad brought me into the living room and he's like, you got to watch this black man being a president. It's a big thing, Nico. And I was kind of apathetic to it because I was just like, all right, it's another president. That's cool. But as I got older, I noticed just all the personalities and mindsets that were behind that movement, and it was successful. You got elected twice, but the best way it could be seen is in, like, the Boondocks. You had the rappers that were suddenly activists, and then you had older Black people from the older generation saying, "Oh, this is exactly what I fought for," and then they're wanting their credit. And then if there was a Black person who was just like, I don't know if we should be celebrating yet, just watch it unfold, you were suddenly an Uncle Tom, or you got that stare of you don't belong. So were you always like that even before Obama, like questioning, or yeah?
Yeah, I would say so. My mom used to say I was. I think the thing was, it didn't make sense. I didn't see the harm in just asking the question. It's not pushing an idea, saying someone's right or wrong, just asking the questions. I did a talk recently to a group of high school kids, and that was what my speech was about. It was about truth. And shockingly, I said, a lot of the arguments on these hot button issues, I'm going to say something that's not really that PC, and you don't hear that often. But what I said was, most of their arguments have some truth in it. I mean, there's extremes on the fringes, but most of the people have some truth. But is it the truth? And how do you figure that out? So I went through by giving them stats that are factual. But the problem with the fact is, they're using that fact to imply something that does not necessarily comport to the fact. You need more information to decide. They may be right, they may be wrong. But one thing we know for sure is you don't have enough information to decide whether they're right or wrong. So, going down the process of how do you assess that with so much information coming your way? So you talk about Obama. My thing was really, I'm really simple. Like, it's like he was running. It's like, cool. And when people are like, yeah, you got to vote, especially when he won the primary, now it's serious. Other people had run, but they didn't primary. And people looked at him, it was a different time. Nobody just instantly calls you Uncle Tom. They were like, that's odd. Because I wasn't singing the praises of McCain. I was just like, my thing was, but he was a state senator. Well, he was a U.S. senator. He was a senator for 4 days. I mean, he became senator and then he ran for president. Let's be real. He was staying, because I was out in Chicagoland, so I was there. I was like, he was a state senator. Do you really want a state senator to be president? I don't know if he's ready. That was my only thing. Mm-hmm. And then when he wins, you make a good point. Dad comes in. You got to see this. So it's not that it wasn't kind of a big deal, probably a bigger deal than you and maybe me and some others thought. But that's not the issue. If you talk to those same people now who are your age and a little older, not the older people, old enough that they're like 40 now, so they look back on it then, they're all complaining. Now they're saying stuff like, well, Obama didn't do this and Obama didn't do enough and Obama should address this. And this is one of the times I definitely defend Obama. And I say, Obama wasn't the problem. It's not about whether he did a great job or poor job. Obama was never the problem. You're the problem. No man could ever have lived up to the expectations you all were putting on him. You voted for him, one, as if he was going to be the president of just Black America, not all of America, which is physically impossible. And you assume that you agree with everything, even though he's telling you stuff and you don't agree with everything he says, because it's important to get a Black. That's the problem with following just the Black face. Because if you vote for somebody just because they're Black and then you don't get what you want, you're disappointed. But that's because you didn't vet him. You didn't say, does his beliefs comport to mine? You just said, I want a Black face. So now they're looking at it after the fact and saying he didn't do enough. I don't know if you remember, but there were videos around days after he won of people, go back and find out. I think one of the women was in Cleveland. And then there was that famous cell phone lady, right? Obama phone lady. Well, they were like, yay, I'm not going to have to worry about paying my rent now.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
No, they were definitely.
So what was Obama going to do? I mean, and people roll their eyes when I say I defend Obama, but I'm like, what was he supposed to do? There was nothing he could do to live up to, I don't have to pay my rent. Racism is gone. On the white side, there are white people who didn't agree with him, which is asinine to me, that voted for him because maybe if we get a Black guy in, they'll shut up with this race thing. Yeah. Let's look at it now. So everyone was wrong, regardless if it was the people saying we need this Black face and it's going to change the way they view us, whether it's the white person saying if we vote for him, racism is gone and we have a colorblind America. If it was the person that says we're going to get him in, he's going to put his fist up and be pro-Black, all of them were wrong. Right. So technically, they'll never say it. But the guy who was right was the guy who just looked at his views and say, I voted for him because I agree with his policies, or I voted against him because I didn't agree with his policies. Because at the end of the day, that's what made a difference. So even if you voted against him and they want to call you an Uncle Tom, well, he won twice and nothing changed. So technically, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, I again, I was in high school. I remember having the whole school get called into the auditorium just to watch the inauguration. And now, like you said, kind of everyone was wrong with putting him in this unrealistic position of not just the president, but the person that was supposed to solve all the social ills that America has went through. And this is great because you talked about vetting and going through the facts. And that is what your book is all about in terms of, you did a lot of, I mean, this book is gentle, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean gentle in that I'm going to be meeting with some of the old PTO from the school that I worked with. They're white liberals, affluent, and I've shared with them my views and my criticisms of what I was seeing in schools. And honestly, after reading this book, this seems like the most approachable book to start with in just exposing yourself to things that show that there's inconveniences with the Black Lives Matter ideology and the movement for Black Lives, which is behind it, and how you show. So, one, my question is, how was your process for doing the research for this book in terms of, did you just go to their website? Because it looked like you had to do a lot of sleuthing too to find, even with that, you have a diagram that shows where the money's going. I'm like, my head's spinning. So how did you start the procedure?
Well, it was harder than I expected it to be because my point was simply, I set out with a really clear, simple thing.
Yeah.
Prove to people that my views of why some of this stuff is wrong, right? So obviously I'm going to put my views in it just like anyone else. But where I veer from that is like, I put that in there so you know where I stand. So I'm, open about it. The transparency is there. But set that aside. Let's assume I'm wrong and give you your argument. Here is why you're still not going to get the results. It's like the example we just used with Obama. Why you're not going to get the results you expect to get, because the way you're approaching it and the things you're assuming, the things you're taking back. Because I openly say 1619 Project, I say it's easily 70 some odd, mostly factual. That's not the issue. And when people will cut me off there and say, well, if it's factual, then you're attacking it must be political. No, I'm attacking it. That's what makes it more dangerous. If it was openly 100% lies, I can just prove that it's lies and move on. But what the problem is, they give you a fact, so they give you some truth, but they don't give you the truth. So they don't give you enough information to understand. So that's part of the problem. Same thing with Black Lives Matter. I set out to say, mostly to white liberals, right? Because black people weren't really paying attention to it down the road, right? Until after George Floyd died. Before that, I didn't know anybody that was wearing a T-shirt, signing in front of the house. All white liberals.
Was there? I'm sorry to just interrupt, but was there any sort of uptick with, when Ferguson happened?
Well, yeah, but they were new then, right? They were like a year on. That was like their second thing. It was Trayvon, then that, and then we got to start it because the people started were in Missouri. So they originally started the movement because of that. They saw what happened with Trayvon, then Michael Brown, and that's when it started. So of course it was kind of big, it was kind of moving around. But by 17, nobody was talking about that in the black community. 18, nobody was talking about it. But I would go around the suburbs of Chicago and see Black Lives Matter signs in the windows of affluent white neighborhoods all the time. Never saw it in the black community. Never saw anyone with the T-shirt. Right, so I'm saying, so then George Floyd died and the people throwing all this money in. And I'd already been writing about the problems and the flaws with the movement. So I wrote this, my goal initially was just to point out the flaws in both what they wanted and what they're doing with the money, to tell white liberals, if you want to help black community because you thought the George Floyd's murder was a travesty and you want to help, that's fine. But that is not the organization to do it, because you're never going to get anything in the black community for it. After the fact, somebody's right. Look at where the money went. Look at how many more people died. So the facts were on my side. But, this is 2 years ago, so they didn't know. So that was the goal. But the problem is, you said, did I just go to the website? There was nothing on the website. Right, you go to the website, there was nothing there. It was like, donate here, Black Lives Matter. We care about this stuff. Free 21 Savage in the day.
Oh my gosh, that section.
Right, that was a whole section on the site for years. It might even still be up. I was like, that's all they focus on? And he wasn't even, from here, right? He was, here illegally, and that's why they were deported.
Yeah.
So then I said, well, there's got to be more to it. Then I found an article about millions of dollars going to them. The headlines like BLM gets $100 million. But when you read the article, which few people do today, they just read the headlines. It didn't say the money went to Black Lives Matter. It said the money went to the movement for Black Lives. Sounds similar, but that's not what it said, right? Words matter. So I looked that up, and there's this whole treasure trove of information that I had never heard of, so, which is why I write about it in the book. Because to this day, most people don't know about it, and it got no coverage. So that's the movement for Black Lives piece. But ideally, getting that information, I wanted to make sure people got it from their words, not in sound bites. So even if you disagree with me, you can't read it. You can disagree with me, right? You can't read it and say, well, he's just doing that right-wing thing where they take somebody out of context. Nope. Here's full blocks, full paragraphs, full sentences. Yeah. So how do I take this out of context? You remember a year and a half ago, the argument was about defunding the police? So the right started to attack. Defunding police will be a bad thing. So the left countered, well, they don't really mean defund the police. Why are you taking their words out of the context? That means reallocating resources. They're not trying to eliminate the police. Go to their website. We are abolitionists. We believe in the full-on ending of all criminalization of Black lives and the end of all detention centers, which including, up to and including, right, ICE detention centers, jails, prisons, detention centers for youth, security guards in the schools, no surveillance. So this is spelled out specifically. So explain to me, regardless of my views and your views, as an impartial, logical, honest person, how you can read that and say, I'm spinning their words, taking their words out of context. They don't mean defund. They mean abolish. They're defunding on their way to get to abolishment. That's what they wanted. Yeah. Their words. So I take their words, and I explain what this means and why it's a problem.
And you say most people won't read it. Well, after reading your book, you kind of have to read it. And it sets up everything perfectly. And I laughed because I feel like you were really in tune with the pacing of this book, because right around page 137, you straight up say, because my head was spinning when I was reading these long sections of their demands and the problem.
Cis heteropatriarchy.
I'm like,
they were making up words.
Yeah, and so you said it exactly. I don't know if they read their own website, but at this point it's repetitive. And that was to end your section on their website. So I was like, thank goodness. So my question to you is, how did you maintain, I guess the best word I can use is patience while reading all of that? Because right around that point of the book, my head was starting to spin when I would read those sections. I wouldn't be mad. I wasn't mad when I read it. I was just more so, I felt confused. And yeah.
Well, I felt that, who was my, whenever you're doing this, you got to say, who's your target audience? And people talk about left, right, and conservatives and all that stuff. And most of the people buy it as conservative because of the matter. But that wasn't my target. Yeah. So I had to keep in mind, who am I speaking to? So I had to hear, I get ready to write something. I might say, nope, I can't write it that way, because you got to remember, your target audience is not conservative. So where a conservative will hear that and cheer, somebody's going to say that was political. Are you making a political statement? Or they're going to say you're taking it out of context. So I needed to lay, it's like a defense. I have someone on trial, right? And, I can either be the defense attorney, in which case maybe Americans, the nation and the culture is on trial, or I am the prosecutor and I'm trying to lay out the case as to why BLM committed this crime. Yeah. So I can't just say BLM is bad, so send them to prison. I have to give you the information clear, exhibit 1, 2, 3 to 400. So I have to lay it out clearly and hear somebody saying, well, that doesn't prove anything. Funny you say that. Here's my next piece of evidence. So I had to write it, as you say, pace it in a way that I give them enough that it's the easy people to get the conservatives like, yep, they're bad, thanks. And then some people push back. I say, okay, you're pushing back. Here's another layer. So when I say for instance, you're a very successful business person, you're white, you're kind of liberal, but you're a capitalist, all right? You want to make money, you want to do good, but you want to make money. You think there's racism in America, a lot more than me. It's more prevalent than I think it is, right? And you want it to stop, and you want to help anybody there. So then to you, I say, okay, do what you can to push back against racism where you can. But keep in mind, if you're giving money to BLM, you're giving money to an organization that says this. And I quote them saying, we are anti-capitalist. 3 things, right? We are abolitionists, we are anti-capitalists, and there's a third thing they say. So they are openly saying, somebody on the right, it's not Ted Cruz saying they don't like capitalism. All you just putting words in their mouth. No, this is their site saying, in quotes, we are anti-capitalist. We are against, blah, 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 boom. So if you're that guy, no matter how much you hate racism, why would you give them money to an organization whose primary goal is to end your way of life? If we had our way, there would be no Tesla, no Apple, no HP. We want you gone, right? Yeah. So all these companies are massaging their sites and putting stuff on and saying, we support Black Lives Matter. What you're supporting is an organization that wants you dead.
Yeah.
So that's what I needed them to know. My first thing was to stop the bleeding. It's plumbing, right? I got a flood in the house. Water's gushing in. I called the plumber. My book was saying, I want the professional plumber, right? So I don't want the guy who's going to come in and try to find out where the leak is first. I want the guy who's going to shut the main water off first.
Yeah.
Right. Stop the water from coming in. So to that respect, I'm saying, I'm not trying to change people politically. I don't care who you vote for at this point, whatever, maybe down the road. My goal is white liberals stop giving them money. Now, what you do after that, I don't care. If you give it to the NAACP, if you start your own organization, that's a separate fight. Right now, stop the bleeding. Stop supporting them because they are walking around saying looting is okay. They're walking around saying punching the police is okay. They're walking around saying release people out of jail. And 2 years removed from that, what did we get? What were the end results in Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, Gary, Indiana, DC, and New Orleans? We didn't get less crime.
Yeah.
We didn't get more police indicted, a couple more. So you got 10 more police indicted. You got a lot more fewer people arrested, but you had a lot more violent crimes and a lot more people murdered.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember that news. Well, when George Floyd happened, we were all still in lockdown, and I'm here in California. And I mean, I don't go to San Francisco anymore. My cousins that are in San Francisco have shown me videos of the security cam outside of their place, and they're not even in a bad area. They're in a nice area of just security camera, 3 a.m. Car drives up, checks in the car, bashes the window, nothing in it, just casually drives away. Nothing will get done. And it's gotten to a point where my family's told me, like, yeah, people will just write notes on their car saying there's nothing
in here. Right. I saw that.
And it's just, I guess there's some good news in the DA for San Francisco getting recalled. But this desire to excuse abhorrent behavior in the name of understanding their plights of where they came from.
But see, that's the key. Doing it is not really right anyway, because it causes more crime and terrorizes people. But the problem is the silly racist white supremacist is what it really is. If you look at the clear definition of reason that they're doing it, what they're saying is, this white affluent liberal will say, blacks have it harder. They don't say these words, but basically they're saying blacks are more likely to commit crime for whatever genetic reason, whatever problem blacks have. Blacks have a crime problem than criminals. And it's racist to lock them up. So we need to let more people out of jail because locking up black people are bad. But what if the black guy is hitting people over the head with a brick? Well, so you got to crack a couple of heads. So a couple. It's not like he's breaking the heads of thousands of people. So he hit 2 people with a brick. So isn't it better not to have that black man in jail? And you ask black people, and black people will say no.
Yeah. No.
Now they're more likely to be like, I don't want low level and nonviolent criminals in jail. Oh, but if you're bashing people in the head in the hood, they want you in the jail. 100%.
And that's another thing, is that people don't understand that the people, the culprits committing these crimes in the hood, in the lower income areas, they aren't even a majority of the community.
Nope.
It's
even close.
Not even close. So it's not like the fact that their voice is taken as the voice of the community, that's dangerous too. So I'm curious, as you were getting all these demands and problems, and you said you were writing articles on it, what was the thing that surprised you the most? Was there any things that were like, yo, wow, I didn't know that? I have my thing, but I'm curious as what yours was.
Based on what I wrote about, or based on what I found when I was looking through stuff?
As well as you were looking through stuff.
I don't know if there's anything that really surprised me, because I'm big on studying human nature, so very little surprises me. But it did make me shift my approach. Like I said, I was already approaching this from a non-political standpoint, but it made me say that we don't win this. This has gotten so far out of hand. We don't win this with just conservatives. So it made me hone on trying to hunt down center left, center right people who politically may not agree with you, but they understand the problem. Yeah. And the other thing that I already knew that it made me highlight, and I talk about this pretty often, and one of the articles I wrote that went viral was about this, and it kind of talked about liberals, but I talk about all of them. My problem is the perception. Back to truth, some truth, the truth, is that too many people, and this is across the board, regardless of race, more amongst whites than blacks, but some politically left and politically right blacks will use this as a cudgel to beat each other because it's a fight. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of bothered by the fact that so many people have a stereotype of blacks, and they assume it for everyone. And so they believe that blacks are uneducated, they are poor, and they are all running around living their lives dealing with the criminal justice system, which is for all three of those things, varying degrees, but the minority of blacks, right? So some on the right might say, look at the crime stat and say, see, blacks are 5 times more likely or commit 50% of the murders and they're only 13% of the population. See, using that to say we have to lock them up. Not saying all blacks are violent, but see, there's a black violence problem. And the left will say, well, take that stat and say, well, blacks are criminalized, but some of them may be innocent and just victims of racism, while others may be guilty, but they're guilty because they look at what the system did to them through redlining, through this, through that, right? Both of them have some truth in it. So then I walk in, push the middle to the side, said, let me give you the truth. The truth is most blacks don't live in poverty. It's 20% higher than whites, too high, but whites about 10%, so it's twice as many. But that means 80% don't live in poverty. But better, 98.5% of blacks are not in the criminal justice system at all. But if it's 98.5, that means most of the poor blacks aren't in the criminal justice system. So that proves two things. One, that most blacks aren't criminals, and to the right. And to the left, I was like, for you people on the left who's saying, well, they're doing it because they're poor, like everybody's Jean Valjean. Well, most poor people, white and black, don't break the law. So quit assuming that poverty is making them steal and shoot, and they're poor because the government is racist and made them poor. So if you want to solve the problem, you have to understand the root of the cause of this problem must be something else, because most poor people aren't robbing you.
Yeah.
Right? You can go to a poor neighborhood. They have higher crime than other neighborhoods. But that's because the guy who's doing it gets away. They don't arrest him, and he does it multiple times. That's his job. So he's robbing people 3 times a week. But the average person in that community is not robbing anyone. Yeah. So that's what I learned. I learned that until you push back against that narrative, people will go with what's easy, right? They'll go with the fact that, well, blacks are all suffering from this thing that we're not suffering from.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's odd because I don't know, when I'm listening to all sorts of takes on these issues, you kind of, your voice I wouldn't even put with like Candace Owens or Larry Elder, and not even saying that those people are terrible because they get smeared a lot, but I can see in discussing these topics that there is almost a temptation to give the side what they want, and to have the patience to make sure you're speaking straight through to both. I commend that because I'm writing about my experience being a teacher, and I am very open with, no matter what happens with this final draft, I'm going to be both. I'm going to feel that I could have done more to be critical, and I could have been more compassionate. And so, what you were saying in terms of things that surprised you, I was surprised by the amount of other oppressed groups that were kind of put into their platform. And
that was my other thing to the black liberals. I would say, I'll let you finish, but I would say, and to you, they're not black.
Yeah.
It should be called BIPOC, multicultural people, mostly if it's focused on gender, lives matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And your point throughout the book is like, they keep saying black men are getting slaughtered by police, but a lot of their platform doesn't care about men in general. I did a quick Google search before this in terms of, I wonder if there is if I go to an LGBTQ site, in their platform, in their advocacy, do they, we also support black, even just saying Black Lives Matter. I couldn't find anything.
Right.
And it's interesting because, you'll get the big comedian like Chappelle applauding, and not just him, but people applauding the LGBTQ community for organizing so well. Why is it that with black organization, at least the mainstream one that we're talking about here, why are they so interested in the interest of another activist movement, but it's not the other way, or it's not reciprocated? Why is that even in there? That leads me to that question.
Right. I mean, that's a good question. I talk about that a bit because I can only speculate. I'm not in their minds, but I think that their organization got hijacked early on. I mean, if you should pick up the book, if for nothing else, to read this paragraph. There's a part where I their words, I break out this long paragraph and say, we are focus on, protecting and defending such and such groups, including, and they list all these people. They had plenty of space. They could have kept going. It's the internet. The paragraph is, 90 words, list of all these people. Some groups, they word in ways you've never even heard, right?
Yeah.
Yet they don't mention, funny, I think I say they don't mention blacks and they don't mention Jews. And if I just say that, the black would seem odd because it's called Black Lives Matter or black men. But if I say Jews, you're like, well, why would they mention Jews? Because they mention women, queer, trans, gender nonconforming, disabled, elderly, young, house. What do they call it? Precariously housed, because they don't want to call them homeless. Immigrants, this, tall, short, all these. I mean, they have a long list. Muslim, all these other things, but they never mention Jews. You mentioned, or Christians, of course.
Yeah,
and they never mention black men. It's all these different forms of all these other groups. So that's it. So to answer your question, what I think, I always say, I don't know for sure. To be fair, I try to give people their argument. You know that. So I said they started this group because they saw a problem with police. And that's the whole point. They used to talk about police are criminalizing black men, right? So it was all about black people being criminalized by police. And I think they got a little interest, made a little money. Maybe they got, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000. And somebody, this is just my speculation, but if somebody can say this doesn't make sense, somebody came to them and said, I like what you're doing, right? You got a great cause. It's got a great catchy title, and you're probably making a little money. You're going to need money to push this out there. I can help you. Let's do a little trade-off. So you're probably making tens of thousands of dollars. I can instantly overnight push that to tens of millions of dollars. Yeah. And you don't even have to change what you believe in. I just need you to add some things. So I don't know if you remember, but if you can't now, but if somebody caught screenshots of when BLM first started, whatever it was, maybe 6 months after they started, for about a year, that one of the platforms was BDS, how they supported boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. Now, many would say, what does that have to do with the black community and police shooting people in the black community? What does that got to do with black? Yeah. But it was on their site. It was a high part of their site. It was 1, 2, 3. It was one of the bigger points. And they used to get all the gender stuff and all that stuff in there. And I just think somebody said, if you add that, you can still have black at the top of the ticket. But if you add that, we will fund you to a level you've never seen before.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I can believe that, because if you were just going on only black issues, you probably couldn't get as much money if you were like black, gay, all of this stuff.
Right, but even better, the whole point, if you take the black out, the point was to talk about policing. It's not even on their site anymore. How do you move forward past, no justice, so no peace, the police are bad, to the only thing you talk about is, overall social justice, including queer and LGBT and this BGT. And what does it say? We're going to be gender focused. We want to center these people and women as leaders in the movement.
Wasn't it
you moved away from your core value?
Yeah, did they remove the dismantle the nuclear family?
Yeah, I think they removed that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
like the BDS and a lot of other things.
Well, I know I only originally asked you for 30 minutes of your time. Are we still good on time?
Your intro got you another 10 to 15 right there.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate that. I'm going to use that 15 then. I need to read this section because it spoke directly to me. I don't know if you watch. I'll read it first. So let me see. Okay. It was. I got it right here. Well, first, did you? As I listened to, Cut the Bull. Are you rapping on the intro?
No, that's Zuby.
It sounds like your voice. Oh my god!
Well, I'm gonna start rapping there. That's
this
Zuby.
Whole time I thought it was you. I was like,
he does it all.
Okay, I needed to get that out of the way. That wasn't what I was bringing. But
yeah, shout out to Zuby. Thanks for the music. And that Patriot, the outro is Patriot J.
Okay, and I do like Zuby. I didn't. That sounded like you because you always open it. I'm like, that is that. Okay. You wrote, and I wanted to talk about this because I was a teacher. Said that like 16 times already, but you wrote, expecting a growth of black doctors from our failing public schools is like mandating that everyone purchase guacamole while ignoring a growing shortage of avocados. I laughed out loud when I read that. So my
Right.
first question to you is, one, were you hungry when you wrote that? And two, I guess you do propose that education is the way to cultivate a pool of applicants for any sort of craft. But I wonder, are there things that that any culture just doesn't find appealing, and it's not a matter of introducing representation? So the example I think of is like being a male teacher in elementary school. Everyone would be like, "Oh, you have no idea how great it is to have a male working and teaching." And in my head, I was like, I think there's things in the male culture that this isn't appealing to work with kids. I don't knock men for not entering the field, but at the same time, I don't think it's wise for me to just host male only introduction to teaching. Like that's not, that alone's not going to motivate people to enter the field. Another example, my dad did database management, and I would ask him about, you want Black people to work for you, right, Dad? And he's like, I would love to hire someone to work for me, but my pool of applicants is nothing but Indians. And and it's this thing of like, how important is representation? But also, how do you cultivate that pool without forcing things?
Well, that's great. I mean, that's you just pitched right to my whole point of a lot of things I talked about. So first, I wasn't hungry, but I can always make room for a little bit of guacamole. It's so tasty, right? You gotta have already had dinner. It's like, I'm full. There's one little guacamole. Why not?
Yeah,
I love guacamole. The other thing though is that I do think education is greatly important. The thing you say about male elementary school is another thing I talk about, which is interesting. And I'll tie all this together, including your father and all that kind of stuff, and the piece you asked about representation. So
yeah,
it's my point there. I like to use, the reason I said that is because I try to come up with witty examples, because people understand stories and examples. So if I tell you this, you might be like, oh, that's smart, that's a good idea. But if I paint a picture where they're like, and it's got to be a non-political one example, so people won't say that's right wing, that's left wing. So I like the avocado thing, because the whole point, I think I did like another paragraph leading up to it, and the point was that you're trying to mandate something and you so focus on the results, hence this new talk of equity, that I think that's wrong. But even if you're right, you're so focused on the results, you're not focusing on what you need in order to get that result. So guacamole, obviously the main ingredient, you cannot make guacamole without avocados. So I wanted people to visualize, like a president like Biden up there saying, my administration is now forcing everybody. It's in the, I'm signing executive orders. It's in the federal government's dictate all the way across, that you have to have guacamole. Every restaurant must have come to the table and put guacamole on the table. Every meeting, you have to put guacamole on the conference table, right? So this demand, and in this this analogy, of course, guacamole would be hiring more Blacks. So we're going to force this, right? Mandate it. So obviously that alone is going to exponentially increase the number of Blacks that are employed in these various roles and the amount of guacamole. But no one paid attention to how many avocados were being grown. So now they go to make the mandatory guacamole, and there are no avocados there. So I always argue to people that, you hear people demand, we need jobs in the community. I say, no, you don't. You do need jobs, but you're starting on the third or fourth rung of the ladder, and people can't jump up that high.
Yeah.
What you really need is skills, because if you don't have the skills to do the job, then either you won't get the job. If they force you to get the job, you're going to get the job and fail. You're going to feel like a failure. The people are going to seem evil for firing you, but they never set you up for success.
Yeah.
So I go around asking people, when they talk about racism is the bigger problem, I said, think of every Black person you know. And I said, now think of all of them that have a letter behind their name. Right, CPA, a PE, MD, whatever the case may be. How many of them are unemployed? I've been asking this question for 3 years. I've yet to tell me somebody that they know that's unemployed. And if they are, it's temporary, right? So they all have jobs. So whatever percentage of racism we are still facing, it sounds like we can solve the income gap and the unemployment gap by training people to do certain kind of jobs. But you can't just force them, like you say. You got to get them interested in it. Many people, you ask kids what they want to do for a living, nobody says actuary. It's a great paying job, but nobody even knows what that is.
Yeah.
So you have to catch them while they're young and cultivate.
Yeah.
So that's the point I'm trying to make there. All the effort at the top in the world won't make a difference if you're just clipping off the leaves. The racism's just going to grow back. You got to get to the root of the problem, and I don't think they're doing that. And to representation, it's not that representation is bad and it can't be good in some situations. They're focusing on it like it's the end all. Like if we just put blacks there, blacks will just organically become engineers.
Yeah.
No, you need black engineers, but you also need them to teach them, train them while they're young. You need to catch 7th graders and get them interested in math and science. You can't just wait until they're graduating high school and try to push them that way because they haven't prepared themselves. So it goes beyond just the representation. And if you're focused so much on representation, are you losing out on the best people that you could have that don't fit that mold, which is also a problem. But lastly, to the teacher thing, yeah, you might be right about males in elementary school, with younger kids, there's something about them that don't want to do that. But I know I'm old enough that I went to school that there still was a lot of male teachers. It was probably majority women still, but not a lot, 51-49. There were a lot of male teachers. But they were all junior high and high school, right? Not many in kindergarten, first grade.
Yeah.
But even that number has gone down, right? Because you're not incentivizing them to do it. So the last thing I'll say, whether it's that, getting people into STEM positions, more representation. You talk about groups. Do they care about these same things? You get more of what you incentivize, right? So right now we're in a culture where we're incentivizing bad behavior, maybe indirectly. No one's on TV saying you should shoot people. No one's doing that, Charles. True. But they are saying when they shoot people, well, maybe we should find out why. Yeah. Maybe we should talk about his childhood, right? But my funny thing to that is always, because I think differently, is I don't even push back initially on that. I say, let me ask you a question. Why are you more concerned for that criminal? There's nothing wrong with having compassion for him, but why are you more concerned for him than you are the person whose face you put a gun in, right? You have to have some compassion for the victim. So when we talk about abortion, for me, it's not about whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. I mean, pro-lifers get mad when I say that, right? Yeah. But it's like, no, you're missing the bigger point. That's important. That's not the bigger point. The bigger point is, why are we incentivizing it, right? If you want to make abortion easy and available for everybody, boom, my trade-off would be, then you have to stop talking about it. It's the law of the land. Everybody can do it. Now, what you incentivize is, instead of incentivizing, let me show you where you go to get an abortion. Everybody knows that. But you say, you can get an abortion. But if you don't want to, if you want to save that baby, if you want to be able to raise that kid, but you can't afford it, here are some resources we can give you. But instead, Elizabeth Warren wants to shut down those resources, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm saying, if you incentivize, if you promote abortion, you're going to get more abortion. If abortion was legal everywhere, but you stop talking about it, you get fewer abortion because you're not always telling, it's like that car. You want to buy a car. And now it's you get an idea, I want an SUV. Now, every time you look, you see, now you narrow it down to 2 cars. Now, everywhere you go, you see those 2 cars. You think there's more people driving those cars? No, mentally, you are in a position that you're looking for those cars. So now they stand out when they drive. So that's what we're doing with abortion, with people who are the flash mobs who are robbing stores. Mass shootings. I mean, here's a controversial statement, but we're promoting mass shootings. What do you mean, Charles, promoting mass shootings? Well, make the man famous. You say his name. You put him on video. You keep, it's been a month since the Buffalo, New York shooting, and here in New York, they're still like, boom, racist massacre. Let me give you an update on the kid, right? And that store is now open. They keep talking about it. So the next person who has a mental illness is thinking, how can I top that guy? Yeah. But they don't think that, because they're not thinking in the way that person would think. But you get more of what you promote. So if we promoted family values, if we told people it's good to be married, not it's easy to get divorced, but it's good to be married, that changes the narrative, right? It's just a matter of which things you're promoting. I think
even contraceptives. Like there's so many gates
before you get to the abortion, right?
Yeah.
And they start with that, right?
Yeah. So
that's what I think.
The last thing I want to say, or I want to ask you about, I mean, we could talk about what other things that you want to, but I had to read this, page 166. Biracial kids have a somewhat unique experience. As you can probably imagine, most of them identify as black, but some have a bit of an identity crisis. Most biracial kids who struggle with their identity find a way to deal with it when they get older, but those who struggle often have difficulties embracing their blackness. They are left with a longing to connect with the black community in the same way most blacks do. They feel a distant closeness to their blackness. They have a sort of one minded romantic relationship with it. This is intensified in children who do not grow up in majority black neighborhoods or those who grow up in families with financial comfort. For them, blackness and the injustices against it are magnified. So, I am speaking a representation of biracial kids across the world. And I can't say anything to that because, like, I, I, I read that, and it's like in battle rap where the rapper says something incredible, and the guy's like, I can't knock
Right.
it. Like that.
No.
Good job, good job. It was. I read that, so I guess I wanted to bring that up to you because uh, I I came from a place of just that desire to feel like I belong to the black community. And as I got older, like you said, I just realized it was a fool's errand because chasing the black identity it's not it wasn't real, or it wasn't fruitful to my own self actualization.
Mhm.
But I would say I looked at that as more the universal trait of insecurity. So for me, it was wanting to belong to the black community. I also see that insecurity show in some black people where I won't expose myself to anything that's not black out of fear of losing my blackness.
Right.
And that insecurity for white people shows in complete compliance for whatever the black voice is saying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, we know what you're suggesting for biracial people to work with, but what would you say to that insecure the people who are weighed down by their insecurities that are black and white?
Well, first I'd say that, like in the book before that, I say, well, it's not that I'm analyzing people, but it's just there's something to it. You have to think about this because the proof is in the pudding. It's not like I haven't talked to other people who don't push this extreme narrative, right? That have the same thing, right? There, because most of the people that I talk to that are biracial, of course, there's a period. If you're biracial and you grew up in an affluent area that is mostly white, they still notice some things, but you go home and one of your parents is white and so on. So there's this thing it's just a thing, right? It's just like no different than being overweight. It's not a massive thing. And I'm thinking the vast majority deal with it. They notice it, they chuckle about it, they move on with their life. So what I was honing in here are the ones who have a difficulty in dealing with it and go over to the radical end, right? So most of them, like you were overweight as a kid, you remember being teased, you remember some things. You may still be overweight and it changed the way you view it, or it made you get in shape or whatever it did, but it didn't become your whole being. At some point you learn to deal with it. But for those who are overweight that didn't learn to deal with it, it's kind of the same thing. So it's just a component. It's not like there's some mental illness in them, right? But there's some who like, I have to prove my blackness, right? It's not just that they search for it or search to get a better understanding of where they fit in the world, right? So that's why, and to those people say, well, how can you just psychoanalyze people? You're not even biracial. I'm like, okay, prove it. Let's just look at what we see out there. The loudest voices in the pro-black movement are either biracial or they're in an interracial relationship, right?
Yeah.
So you got Barack Obama, right? Biracial, but he was raised by his white mom and then his grandparents, so he didn't really see that he didn't have that black father say this is what you need to do, right? You have all these celebrities, I mean, we can go down the list. There's so many of them. You got obviously famously Colin Kaepernick and his situation. But the funny part you didn't read was I referenced that saying I read the 1619 Project.
Yeah.
And I'm reading Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Yes.
Her essay. It's the longest essay. She's the founder of the project. It's like 13,000 words. And it's all built around her father. Talked about her grandmother, her father, and then this, and that he was in the military. This is going on and going on and going on. And at some point, I just said to myself, she didn't mention her mother. Her mother's got to be white. There's no other reason why this woman is all talking about race. She knew both of her parents, and she's only mentioned, what kid doesn't mention his mama? So I said that had to be it. Sure enough, I Googled it, and her mom's white. So she left her mom out of the equation. So that's an issue with that. You're talking about your life. You had 13,000 words. You are the founder of this project, and you discounted your mother.
Yeah.
Nobody discounts their mother.
Yeah.
right?
No.
So there obviously is something about blackness that makes them feel that it needs to be my center. It needs to be my all. Once they go that far down the road, right? There's no way back, right? There's no other way for them to move through the world except through their blackness. Now, most of my biracial friends that don't do that, but then they're also not obsessed with race, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that was really the key. But as far as the insecurity, that's just human nature. We're all, I like I said, I liken it to anything else that that is different about you that stands out. Some people, and a lot of people own it and become proud of it. But that's as they get older and they're mature. But when they're young, they're not proud of it. If you were, like I mentioned, overweight earlier, if you were skinny like me in school and everybody made fun of it, it's like, the skinny thing, you think about that, right? But then you get older, you're like, I don't care. Everybody else is trying to lose weight. Why would that bother me, right? But so I would assume that they deal with that in the same way, and hopefully they talk to people about it and they'll find it's not that big of a, because I'm sure your parents thought about this. So if you got biracial parents and they're still together, interracial couple, and you have these issues at 12, 13, 14, you mention it to them, they're going to tell you, well, you don't feel bad about us. We don't have a problem with it. Do we raise you any different? Mom is white. Mom's like, what do you mean black people treat you different? Nobody's going to love you more than me. So they're able to answer to that. But if you don't mention it, they don't know. Like, I doubt Colin Kaepernick was having these kind of conversations with his parents, or they would have had reasonable conversations with them. They would have taken him to black people in their circle who aren't militant. So he didn't grow up thinking I'm still talking about I'm a slave.
Yeah.
Right. The NFL draft is like a slave. It's like a slave trade or something, auction. I'm sorry. And you look at that, and people debated how crazy it is. My thing was like, so is the draft only for the black players, or do they? Because they're doing the measuring. They do this. Don't they measure the white players too?
Yeah. No, you Tim Tebow, you're good. Just walk through.
Right. You just get to walk in, right? Oh, you didn't tell me you were white. You can pick your team. Which one of these teams you want to go to? Well, go ahead. I got to spend my time, measuring the black people. You go over there and have a cup of coffee. That's insane. So the things they believe can be disproven, which is a little bit of thought, just a little bit of thought. But people are so emotional they don't even want to think about it. That's the fascinating thing, is that people who are educated and know better believe this stuff.
Yeah, man, I agree, and I'd love to talk to you again about all of, because I mean, like I said, you got me through the school year in terms of.
Yeah, if nothing else, we got to talk about how that happened.
Yeah, man. I'm trying to be respectful of your time. I'd love to have I don't know, man.
We'll have to do a part 2 then.
We'd have to do a part 2, if not just have a conversation over the phone or something. But is there anything else you would like to plug in? Because I know we didn't get to your C and your work with them.
Educational excellence. Yeah.
Yes.
C, we just focus on education and putting the things you can control. It's real simple. Worry about the things. It's not even that you're wrong. Racism's everywhere. Okay, we can have that debate. But right now, let me get some letters behind your name so everybody wants to hire you. Yeah. Put black and minority kids, especially the people who are poor, in positions 20 years from now, that when your dad needs to hire some people to work on database development or whatever, that he can see people beyond what he sees now because we've trained them.
Yeah.
That's our goal, right? Let's focus on what we can control. What we can control is critical thinking, STEM, learning math, reading at grade level, those kind of things.
Yes, and it's amazing how far my criticism of public school so far, just because that's the only place I worked, is that we've gotten away from reading, writing, and arithmetic. There's a lot of silver bullet curriculums that are just out to get as many students to take these major tests so data can be accumulated, not making sure that they are intellectually challenged, engaged, or having fun along the way. So
no, they're test subjects now.
Yeah, it is. It's very clear. So thank you. Viewers, again, get this book. I totally recommend it. If you want something to just scratch that itch of intellectual curiosity you have around these issues, if you're in an environment where you can't have that, spend the money. It's money well spent, so that way you can think and consider these ideas, and hopefully recommend the book to another friend and keep it going. So thank you very much, Charles, for your time. I had fun with this conversation, and yes, so like and subscribe to the channel. This has been a good interview. Until next time, take care.